Ontario voters head to the polls next week, and Environmental Defence Canada has released a new study titled Hot Air and Other Gases, a review of the past 4 years of Ontario's climate change in action. I'll be talking to Keith Brooks, Program Director for Environmental Defence Canada. So welcome to the interview, Keith.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So look, what should Ontario be doing to fight climate change?
Well, Ontario should be doing a lot more than what the province is currently doing. We essentially have no climate policy in place, no policy really to drive down emissions from buildings, around transportation. I mean, we actually need a serious plan and a more ambitious target and a government that's dedicated to working on this.
So why isn't Ontario on track to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, when the current government came to power, they basically took an axe to all the existing policy that was in place. They very swiftly canceled the cap and trade program. They canceled hundreds of programs that were designed to help homeowners and small businesses and industry reduce emissions. Then the province put out what they called the Made in Ontario Environment Plan, which was kind of a joke of a plan. It wasn't a serious document. The Auditor General tore it to shreds, and so did we. And then not only that, but then they failed to follow through on any of the policies that they had put it in their plan. So they've really done nothing on climate change except for kind of take us in the wrong direction. They're showing recent modeling that came out in March that showed, that they're saying Ontario is now on track to reach its target, which incidentally they weakened. But we don't think that they are. In fact, we have analysis in our report that shows that emissions in Ontario are not going to move very much at all, based on policy that's actually in place today, which is virtually non-existent in the province.
What about the difficulties in the electricity system? There are a number of nuclear plants that are going to be going down offline for maintenance, and one of them is being retired. And the plan at this point is to replace that electricity with natural gas power plants. And there's a big concern that that will lead to increased greenhouse gas emissions. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, Ontario's going in the wrong direction on electricity for sure. This province led the way in phasing out coal, which was at the time recognized as the largest emissions reductions initiative in North America. And it was something that the rest of Canada followed suit on, right? All of the other provinces are phasing out coal now, and Canada's off on the international circuit with this Powering Past Coal Alliance. And here in Ontario, and the province that led the way, we're actually undoing a lot of the progress that we made there. The plan right now is to dramatically increase the use of natural gas in the province. It's going to add an additional, I think, 12 megatons, which is about a third of the reductions that we got from the coal phase out. It's going to increase emissions by 400% or 500% by 2030, by 2040, depending on what timeline you look at. So it's highly problematic. And this is related to this government's ideological distaste for renewable power, related to this fact that they canceled 750 wind and solar power projects, which actually cost Ontario $230 million. This is an expensive ideological battle against green energy, and it's putting more carbon out onto the grid.
Well, let's talk about the transportation sector. The Ford government seems to have a very odd approach to this. On the one hand, it is trying to attract electric vehicle manufacturing into the province, and battery plants and manufacturing plants. And on the other hand, it refuses to provide any sort of subsidies for electric vehicle sales, as is done in places like BC and Quebec.
Yeah, I think Ontario has had to begrudgingly admit that there is such a thing as a green economy or a low carbon economy, and that if the province wishes to be in the business of manufacturing cars, it'll have to be electric cars. But when this government first came into power in the 2018 budget, the word electric car did not show up once. And it was as though someone went through a draft of that budget and actually struck it out in each instance, because they did talk about cars a lot, and they talked about an advanced manufacturing strategy and things like that. In places where you would expect to see the words electric car appear, it did not appear. But then over time, yes, the automakers and the federal government and other folks, including the unions, have said that they see that the future is about building electric cars. The provincial government has gotten on that bandwagon kind of, reluctantly. I'd say, that Ontario's ambition around electric cars is still too low. The province is planning on building, they're saying now, 400,000 EVs by 2030. which is about 20% of the total number of vehicles that would be produced in this province, whereas the ambition federally is that 50% of sales in 2030 are EVs. So we're still kind of behind there. But then I think more worryingly, yeah, there's no incentives to help with affordability for EVs, which we do need for now. And there's no zero emissions vehicle mandate that requires that the cars be sold here. And so in addition to there being incentives in BC and Quebec, there's also a policy that requires that car makers sell those vehicles there. And if we don't have that policy here in Ontario, I think Ontarians are not going to be able to buy the electric cars that we're actually going to be making in this province.
The International Energy Agency has said that there's a new clean energy economy emerging globally, and countries and regions are competing fiercely for investment in that. And clean electricity is an absolute prerequisite. And it seems, and at the end of the day, where capital gets invested, jobs get created. So it seems to me that if the Ford government is not pursuing a clean electricity program, and especially as electricity demand for electricity increases, that jobs are at risk.
I think that's true. And, for all the knock on the Green Energy Act, and there were certainly some challenges with the way that piece of legislation was rolled out. What it did definitely do is it led to incredible growth in wind and solar power deployment here in Ontario. And it also created a lot of jobs. It was billions of dollars in investment. There were solar panel manufacturing facilities all around the GTA. There was large wind turbine facilities as well in Tillsonburg and in Hamilton and all these places. There was quite a jobs boom as a result of that clean power, and a lot of good knock-on effects as well, in that other businesses are attracted to that kind of cluster around clean technology, around clean growth, seeing this as one of Ontario's strengths. And we are a manufacturing province, and that's manufacturing is the future of the green economy. And one other thing about Ontario is that we are not an oil and gas producing province. Our prosperity is derived from innovation and technology and manufacturing and those kinds of things, not so much from resources. And so we're actually very well positioned to be a serious player in this clean economy going forward, and don't face some of the challenges that some of the Western provinces or even some of the maritime provinces do face.
Speaking of clean electricity, the Ford government did provide a subsidy for one of the provincial steel plants to switch over to electric technologies. And that seems to be the way the steelmaking industry is going. But again, you can subsidize plants all you want. If you can't provide the clean electricity, then that prevents industry like steelmaking from decarbonizing and investing.
Well, all of that's true, right? Electrifying as many things as we can is one of the backbones of how we fight climate change. We've got to get as many things on electricity, but that only works if the electricity grid is clean and is carbon free. And so that's true for electric vehicles, right? If we have electric cars and we're filling them up with clean power, that's much better than filling them up with carbon intensive power. If we have a steel plant that's running on electricity, that's much better than it running on coal as it is today. But it's only better if if the grid is actually clean as well. And so, yeah, I think Ontario is headed in the wrong direction on the electricity file. This is going to hurt the province's competitiveness, and it takes a chunk out of all of the things that we're doing in this province to shift towards electricity as part of our fight around climate change, because the electricity grid is getting dirtier.
From your organization's point of view, if you had the opportunity to write the climate plan for the province, what would it look like?
Yeah, well, our report that we put out has a number of recommendations. The first one is we'd like to see a stronger target from this province. The current government weakened the target that Ontario had in terms of how much emissions reductions we were going to strive for. We now have a target that's weaker than the federal target. As I said, it's weaker than the previous government's target, and it's certainly much weaker than what would be required under the Paris Agreement. And Ontario's target, in fact, is so weak now that the province is being sued by 7 Ontario youth for endangering their future. So number one is strengthen Ontario's target. We think that a 50 to 60% reduction by 2030 is what this province should be striving for. Number two, we need to strengthen and finalize the emissions standards for industrial emitters. The large industries in Ontario are getting off the hook. They are paying only a very small carbon price not paying as much as individuals, in fact, are paying, and not paying as much as small businesses are paying. Those large ones are in a separate program, and that program is too weak. The province needs to strengthen it and actually make those big polluters pay. It's an important part of the puzzle. Then we need to deal with transportation. We've got to cancel these plans to build new highways, need to do more to support more shifts into transit, and need to put in place some policies to make sure that Ontarians can buy electric cars. If you need a car, you should be making sure you can buy an electric car, but without policies, those cars are going to be financially out of reach in this province. And also they just will not be sold here unless we have a requirement that automakers do sell them here. So we won't be able to buy the EVs that we're making. For this province needs a net zero building code. This is something that we're trying to adopt federally. Other provinces are moving forwards on, but Ontario is actually in the process of renewing the building code and making zero improvements on the efficiency and carbon intensity side. And that's a big issue because buildings are a major source of emissions in the province. So we need a net zero building code and an aggressive retrofit strategy to reduce emissions from existing buildings. And then the fifth one is something we've talked about at length already, but we got to phase out the use of natural gas for power and get back into building renewables in this province.